I just wanted to share a clip from a video I was watching today. This is Justin Sledge from the Esoterica channel, and he is an academic who explores topics within the occult, the esoteric, religion in general, very much from an academic perspective. And in this case, he is looking at the evolution of the God of ancient Israel, one God among many, into just God, the only absolute being, the creator of the universe, the God of monotheism. And the scholarly consensus seems to be that ancient Israel was perhaps polytheistic, but sort of moved into, or alternated with periods of henotheism. So the difference being between henotheism, polytheism, monotheism, only one God in existence, polytheism, many gods, and we kind of worship them all. In henotheism, there are many gods in existence, but we only worship one God. And in the case of the ancient Israelites, that was the God of Israel. The other gods existed, but they weren't to be worshipped. The God of Israel was to be worshipped. So this is a henotheistic perspective. And so this video is the second part in a series that he's doing to describe this evolution. And the clip I'm about to play was really striking to me because it was kind of two very Nietzschean moments. Two Nietzschean moments that in a way are kind of opposite to each other in valence. So what I mean is that the first is, I guess, somewhat negative, and the second is somewhat positive. And I'll explain what I mean by that when I play both of the clips. So, as you're about to hear, the scholarly understanding of the history of this seems to be that the transition from henotheism into a real solid kind of monotheism happened during the Babylonian exile. So when many prominent Israelites were exiled in Babylon, who had conquered Judea. And this transition happened in a really interesting way. Exactly how it happened, exactly why it happened. This is the first Nietzschean moment, and I'll explain what I mean, but first I will play the clip.
The Judeans came upon the notion of a universal God through dialectical negation. Centuries of theological compression, cycles of theological suppression, the now exile left Judean theologians precious few theological options. Perhaps we can say that they were doomed to monotheism. A history of royal theology, now a kingship of ashes. Yahweh is forced to employ foreign kings to do his bidding. What other option is there? But ironically, this greatly expands the power of Yahweh. No longer the God King of the Judeans, but the God King of perhaps all God Kings, one God King to rule them all. With priest and king now powerless and eliminated, that royal theology shifted to a direct relationship of the people of Judea, or of Israel writ large. Israel becomes the more direct servant of the divine law, with individual responsibility now the ethical compass, much more so than familial or communal guilt and punishment, or the commune. But from these two negations arises a synthesis through concrete negation. The elevation of Yahweh as king over the Persians or the Egyptians implies a local negation of the operative power of those gods that underwrite those monarchies. If Yahweh is to be king over them, indeed over the entire olam, of the entire world cosmos, It is no longer enough that those gods are inferior to Yahweh in power. Henotheism isn't going to do the lifting here. Those other gods must be utterly negated as gods and indeed as beings at all. The radical universality of Yahweh logically implies the negation of all other divinities, and it appears that such a theology attains just such philosophical escape velocity from mere monotheistic rhetoric or henotheism or monolatry in the exilic theologian prophet of the writer of Isaiah 40 through 55. This section of Isaiah 40 through 55 has been recognized as a separate composition since at least the 18th century than the previous book composed in the 8th century BCE, what we call First Isaiah. The author of this Deutero-Isaiah is living in the exile, and scholars contend, and I frankly agree, is the best candidate for the development of primitive Judean monotheism. But how does this idea emerge? Precisely through a polemic with the very theological situation of the exile vis-a-vis the powers of those foreign gods who apparently now rule over the Judeans in exile. The clearest statements of this primitive monotheism appear in that polemical context, roughly in Isaiah 40 through 48 and 49 through 55. Specifically, those sections seem to inaugurate some core theological themes, like 1, that Yahweh is the creator of the cosmos and is in control of the present state of affairs, specifically using Cyrus as his anointed, or Moshiach, to direct worldly affairs. 2, Yahweh has specifically chosen Israel, rather than any king, as his servant upon the world. And 3, Israel should choose Yahweh because there are simply no other gods to choose from, as opposed to the vassal contract relationship of the Deuteronomistic theology, though, of course, that choice does involve some degree of redemption. Here it's a logical deduction. There are just no other gods but Yahweh. Pick Yahweh, not pick Yahweh because you get stuff. This positive theology, however, is built upon a larger religious polemic, a negation of what is around them. That polemic and the rhetorical and theological inversions that come along with it are aimed at a comparison of the aniconic Yahweh with the created idols of Marduk and Nabu. Recall that the Assyrians had assimilated Marduk to Ashur in their theological universalizing project. Now, however, with Babylonian Marduk, the ascendant deity in the regional world, and in some sense the best candidate for the greatest god of that time. Well, you come at the king, you best not miss. But in this polemic, and through powerful rhetorical negation, 2nd Isaiah increasingly negates themselves into a universal monotheism. As Smith points out so well, Yahweh is a God who creates the world and crafts human beings, while Marduk is the creation of hands, the craft work of human beings. Idol makers are afraid, while Israel is commanded not to fear. Israel's made the witness of Yahweh, while the idols, they have eyes, but they can't see anything. Israel is said to know that Yahweh is God alone, whereas the idol makers know only their own handiwork. Like, you know you made that. That's not a god. Yahweh is glorified through Israel, while the idols are bedecked in mere human conceptions of beauty. The forest praised Yahweh, but its dead wood is only fit for idols, the same wood discarded and burned. The craft person declares that wood and stone are gods, but Yahweh declares that Israel is their servant. The idols are mute and cannot declare their choice of worldly servants. The immobile statues of Marduk and Nabu must be carried by beasts and humans, while Yahweh carries Israel and the world over, moving even King Cyrus by his command. In effect, the deeper the polemical attack upon the Babylonian gods, there is an inverse logical rejoinder for the very ontological status of Yahweh. The negation of the great gods of this time leaves little logical choice for the Judean theologian. The negation of their theological powerlessness in exile, the negation of the negation, must result, I think, in monotheism, not so much so because of the theologians' fancy or because their desire to be monotheists, but really because their options have simply all run out. Monotheism wasn't a theological choice born out of triumph or dramatic revelation, but a theological dead end born out of defeat, exile, and centuries of historical accidents. Indeed,
So that was the first clip, and you can kind of see there how that is a kind of that's the first Nietzschean moment. So the monotheism arose, at least within Israelite society, as a negation of a negation. It arose as a kind of resentment against their total dominance by a foreign power. And so how could you kind of continue to honor and hold to your gods when you have been completely conquered and sent into exile in a foreign land, and sort of claim that your God is in any way superior or even equal to the gods of the empire that has conquered you? How do you deal with that? And so here it seems that one way to deal with it, and this is coming on the this is following a tendency that has already been happening of moving from polytheism to henotheism, where the amount of deities that one can worship gets whittled down further and further. But coming from that tendency, it seems that the ultimate result of that is monotheism, but only because of the specific material circumstances at the time, which were circumstances of feeling oppressed. So this is, I think, very much a kind of Nietzschean resentment here, something that Nietzsche would be quite pleased to learn about. The origin of monotheism as monotheism itself, not just a particular type of monotheism, as the resentment of a conquered people, as the negation of negation. So that's the first Nietzschean moment. Where we go next is very interesting. This is going to be the second Nietzschean moment, because it is again something that I think is quite Nietzschean, but is actually the opposite valence. It's not something negative. It's something positive, something affirmative. And I'll explain what I mean once again after I play the clip. So here it is.
I'd argue that 2nd Isaiah is driven in this logic further than most monotheisms are willing to go. The writer has Yahweh declare at 45:8 that Yotzer or uvrei choshech oso shalom uvrei ra, ani Yahweh ose kol eila. I form the light and the darkness. I create the good and the evil. I, Yahweh, do all these things. I suspect that few monotheisms have risen to this height, making God responsible for both good and for evil. And indeed, most so-called monotheisms recoil in theological horror that God has even the capacity to create evil, thus making evil the result of some other demigod like the devil or Satan or Iblis or whatever, human failure, some kind of great fall in the Garden of Eden, or philosophical negation incapable of being created as such, the idea of Augustine that evil is simply negation. Even later rabbinical Judaism, the direct inheritors of this theological tradition, were so uncomfortable with this verse that they altered it before putting it into the prayer book. Yotzer or uvrei choshech oseh shalom uvrei hakol, forming light and dark, making peace, and everything, rather than just saying it. Evil, ra. In this sense, Isaiah 45:8 may well be the pinnacle of pure monotheism, a monotheism so pure that it terrified future theologians, having to betray it for philosophical negation or eschatological bitheism, with an inverse god of evil ultimately destroyed at the end of the world as a means of monotheistic saving face. Regardless, the Persian Cyrus would prove.
So this is the second Nietzschean moment, so you can maybe see what I mean if you have some awareness of Nietzsche, or maybe if you've watched some of my recent videos. This is, while the first was resentment and rejection, this is more, I would say, towards affirmation, ultimate affirmation of existence. Why? Because this God that you worship, that you revere, that you potentially even love, this God also that is the only God for whom there's no alternatives, this God that created the whole universe and is responsible for everything, did in fact create everything, did in fact create light and darkness, good and evil. And so what does that speak of? I think it speaks of a fundamental affirmation of life as it is. All the things in existence are good, in a deep sense of good, in the sense of good that's deeper than just good versus evil. In that deep sense of good, everything is affirmed. If you worship a God like this, who is the only God, who is the creator God, if you have the orientation of love and reverence towards this being, then that says that the world is something fundamentally good and something to be affirmed. That's what I take from this anyway. And so it's very interesting that the first move, which was, that, and who knows if this is actually true, but this is, it seems, one very good theory, that historically speaking, biblical monotheism arose out of henotheism because of let's say, to simplify it a bit and maybe phrase it a bit provocatively, the resentment of the exiled Israelites in Babylon, sort of a theological resentment, a theological negation, that actually transformed, and very quickly transformed, almost instantly transformed perhaps, into an ultimate affirmation of existence. Now, obviously, both of these positions are somewhat offensive to Christian and also Jewish, as Justin Sledge pointed out, modern Christian Jewish thought, because of the moral aspect that has become so much a part of these religions. How is it possible that God creates both good and evil? And obviously there's many ingenious ways that you can harmonize the different verses together and so forth, but I'll just leave it at that. That's my two Nietzschean moments from this talk. And if you're interested in this talk and you're interested in learning more about the subject, I would thoroughly recommend Dr. Sledge's channel. It's really fascinating, and I think it's really important to get a kind of grounding in at least what is believed from an academic perspective, from a secular perspective. Not saying that that is the ultimate or even most important perspective, but I think it is an essential perspective to have, essential understanding to have. And so, yeah, that's just what I wanted to share. I hope that this has been interesting for you.